Thank you very much, Senator. And let me recognize Senator Blackburn, please.
Chairman, and thank you again to you all for being here. General Wolters, I know this isn't because of you. Unfortunately, I think you're on the receiving end of a lot of frustration from people because of the way we've received information regarding Ukraine. And I know that we need to continue and to keep a lot of what is happening on the ground in Ukraine in a classified space. But for the second time in less of a year, America is plunged into a military crisis for which our leadership seems unprepared and unaccountable. And I talk to a lot of veterans. As you know, we've got Fort Campbell, we have Arnold Engineering, we have the U.S. Naval Station, we've got Oak Ridge, so a lot of military in our state. And I think that people really want some transparency, they want some answers, they want some accountability, and interestingly enough, silence is a message. Silence is a very strong message. And it's not a message of strength. And I think that it does not work in concert with the principles on which this nation was founded. So I hope that in the near future that this committee is going to be able to have an open hearing on the issue of what is happening in Ukraine. Now, I want to go on to a long-term concern that we've discussed, and regardless of what is happening in Ukraine, I want us to look at what is happening with Beijing and maintaining China as the pacing challenge, not just for DOD, but for each combatant command, is of the utmost importance. And it is something that this committee needs to assist DOD with, as well as to hold the different divisions accountable for. So to each of you, very quickly, what are the roles of your combatant commands in supporting the implementation of the 2018 National Defense Strategy with regard to China? And General Wolters, to you first, and then General Van Ovost.
Senator, I have to do everything within my power as the commander of U.S. Eucom to take a look at the coordinating authority activities that take place inside of my territorial boundaries and find the ones that have any potential impact with respect to China. And as Admiral Aquilino governs and manages his UCP, he needs to do the same with respect to Russia. And this is a process that's been in place for several years, and it's improving, but it continues to require vigilance and scrutiny and iterations to ensure that we can get better.
Let me ask you this. As you look at what is happening with the CCP, what are the trends that are of greatest concern to you?
I would contend that it's the activities of allies and partners as they apply to those nations being able to get what they want or what they shouldn't get. Okay.
General Van Ovost.
Thank you, Senator. With respect to trends that I look at as the Transportation Command Commander, I monitor their ability to project power around the globe, because that is our operating area. And I'm monitoring their investments into ports and their impact of these investments on our ability to maneuver around the world, their ability to disrupt and degrade our ability to project and sustain a force into the Pacific.
Is that the trend that concerns you most? You know, take Djibouti. So their work in areas like that where they go in under Belt and Road, but then they couple that with their military. Is that kind of at the top of your list of concern?
In the top of the list of my concern is the kinetic and non-kinetic threats in the region.
Okay.
But they're secondarily, as I look to them maneuvering around the globe and influencing other nations' decisions, this is about allies and partners. So the second main thing we're doing is we're trying to thicken our relationship with allies and partners around the world to robust them against these threats, certainly from our perspective, the military threats, but also the diplomatic and economic threats that they face from China on a day-to-day basis.
So you consider those in total and not separately?
I do. A whole-of-government approach for all of these allies and partners to be able to robust them. And I will take it a step further. We are inextricably linked to commercial industry. So our commercial industry networks that are around the world right now, we're also working on thickening and protecting them because they are working in these regions day in and day out, delivering around the world, and we rely on them as well.
Thank you. I have some questions I will submit to you all, and thank you very much for your time today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Blackburn. Let me recognize Senator King, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Wolters, Putin has been talking for years about his ostensible claims to Ukraine and the part of Russia and all those kinds of things. And one of his principal strategic goals seems to be a land bridge between Russia and Crimea. Are they making similar noises about Kaliningrad? And is this something we need to be concerned about, or do they accept that Kaliningrad is essentially landlocked from the east?
Sir, with respect to Kaliningrad, it's something we should always be concerned about, but over the course of the last 4 to 5 months, that has not been an issue with respect to Russian activity.
Thank you. Quick question. Speed of shipments from the time the order is given in Washington to authorize equipment to Ukraine, how long does it take to get to the Polish-Ukrainian border?
Senator, it depends. We've been iterating on this. It's improving, and we've seen cases, for example, with a large armored brigade combat team that we've been able to transact that in weeks as opposed to months.
So that's improving, and these are timely shipments. The Ukrainians need this equipment right now, not a month from now.
It's improving. We have cases with smaller force elements where it would take 28 to 30 days, and in many of those cases, we're down to single-digit days in less than a week.
I'm not talking about necessarily force elements, but materiel, weapons.
That falls into the same category.
Same category. Okay. We heard at the beginning of the invasion that there were something like 200,000 Russian troops in Belarus and in Russia. They've committed many, if not all of those. What reserves do the Russians now have? In other words, what portion of their entire military force, in terms of people, have been committed to Ukraine at this point, and what level of reserves do they have to call upon?
Sir, in a different setting, I can give you a precise number, but in the 70 to 75% category are devoted to this from a Russian perspective at this time.
So a very substantial proportion of their total force is committed in Ukraine. Can the Ukrainians succeed in the east as they have around Kiev by they're going to redeploy in that direction too, I presume, since the Russians are doing so? Do the tactics that they've been able to use in the north and northeast succeed in stalling the Russians or perhaps even pushing them back?
Senator, I certainly believe that they can succeed in stalling the Russians.
Okay. I understand the comment, but have the Ukrainians improved over the course of the past month in their terms of use of the weapons and tactics? They seem to have shown significant success in the last week or two.
Absolutely, Senator. The Ukrainian armed forces show a very, very positive learning curve. Hence, I'm optimistic about being able to force additional stalling on behalf of the Russians.
Let me change the subject for a minute. I'm concerned that Russia falls into a number of different COCOMs, and the Arctic. And I'm concerned about coordination between the various COCOMs that have a piece of the Arctic defense, because Russia is certainly militarizing on their shore of the Arctic. What steps are there, or do you feel that there's sufficient coordination to, the whole idea of a COCOM is somebody's in charge, and if you've got three COCOMs that have a piece of the Arctic jurisdiction. Do you feel it's sufficiently well coordinated to respond to a Russian action in the Arctic?
As you're well aware, Senator, in 2019, we established Northcom as the capability advocate for DOD. And in his responsibility today, General Van Herk is doing a tremendous job of orchestrating the supported relationships with the other COCOMs to the point to where all of us have plans for the Arctic, being held accountable to support those plans so that we can improve our indications and warnings on our command and control and our
So
mission capability.
Northcom has the lead.
Northcom is the capability advocate for DOD for the Arctic.
I've never heard the term capability advocate. Does that mean they're in charge?
In so many areas it does, especially when it comes to capabilities, which is ever so important for us in the military to deliver the appropriate effect in the environment.
General, I have some questions for the record on Transcom. The two specifically are cyber resiliency, which you've cited as a potential problem, or not a potential, but a serious problem, and also what lessons Transcom has learned from the Ukraine experience, a kind of preliminary after-action review, if you will. I'll submit those for the record. Thank you very much, Jim.
Thank you, Senator King. Senator Cotton, please.
Thank you both for your appearance today and your service to our nation. General Wolters, I'm sure you deeply regret this will be your last appearance in front of this committee as the combatant commander in Europe. A couple weeks ago, Russia shot missiles that landed about 10 miles from Poland's border. You are the combatant commander for American forces in Europe. You are the Supreme Allied Commander for NATO forces. What direction or authorization have you received from the President or from the NATO Council about the immediate action you should take if a missile were to hit Polish territory?
Continue to fortify the security disposition from a military perspective in air, land, sea, space, and cyber on the eastern portion of Europe.
Are you authorized to immediately strike back at that aircraft that launched the missile or a missile battery that fired it?
No, I am not.
By the time you received that authorization, that aircraft and that missile battery probably would have moved and no longer be susceptible to immediate strike. Is that correct?
That's correct. And again, this all applies to activity that occurs in Ukraine with respect to Russia, not on NATO territory.
I'm disappointed to hear that you don't have that authorization, General. The President said while he was in Europe that we are training Ukrainian forces in Poland. Is that accurate?
At this time, is that the time setting of the statement?
That's what the President said. Jake Sullivan said we are not. I'm just trying to figure out if we are or are not.
I do not believe that we are in the process of currently training military forces from Ukraine in Poland. There are liaisons that are there that are being given advice, and that's different than I think you're referring to with respect to training.
A few weeks ago, President Zelensky asked for the transfer of MiG-29 aircraft from Poland. The Secretary of State said that we gave a green light to that. 2 days later, the Pentagon said it was untenable because they were afraid that it would be escalatory. Were you asked for your best military advice about this decision? And if so, what was it?
I was, and I provided that best military advice to the Secretary of Defense. And if Secretary Austin would like to share that with you, I know that he will.
Can you help me understand how it would be escalatory to provide these aircraft to Poland if they came from us, but not if they came from Poland?
I think that nations have to make the decision independently about whether or not they want to give aircraft to the Ukraine. And that is certainly the case with respect to Poland's choice. With respect to what we do, part of the decision from a United States perspective was metered through the return on investment for the capability of those platforms versus potential escalation. And when that balance was looked at, the decision was made not to advocate giving MiGs to Poland.
I understand that some people think that these MiGs would not be that useful for Ukraine, and I don't believe there'll be a silver bullet, but President Zelensky and the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense has asked for them, and I think this should be a case where we respect their judgments, even if they just use them for spare parts for their aircraft. I think they've earned that right. And I don't think if you're a Russian pilot, you'd view old MiGs as any more escalatory than modern Stingers. If you're the one being shot out of the sky, I suspect you wouldn't either, General. Are we still making distinctions between offensive and defensive weapons that we provide to Ukraine?
Senator, I would expect that we're examining each and every one of the weapons and making sure that on a case-by-case basis, we're taking into account the escalatory potential that they present.
I just think that Russia invaded Ukraine. Ukraine is defending its soil. By definition, every weapon it has is defensive. 2 weeks ago, the president announced the delivery of a package of arms to include Switchblade drones. 1 week ago, the Pentagon acknowledged that they had not yet been delivered. Have those drones been delivered yet to Ukraine?
They have not yet landed in Ukraine. They're in the process.
Do we know why that's taking so long?
I do not at this time, Senator.
One final question I have here. This is about your placemat on the disposition of U.S. forces. We have 40,000 troops in Germany. That's 4 times the next largest troop presence almost, and 40% of our total enhanced presence in Europe now. Is there a strategic reason to have so many troops in Germany, or is that just a historic artifact that it used to be the front lines of the East-West conflict?
It has to do with mostly the United States Army and the availability of training ranges. So when those force elements come over, they can practice shoot, move, and communicating. And when called to go forward, you'll have a ready force. And that's because of the long tradition that you've experienced in your Army career of Hohenfels and Grafenwehr.
Can you tell me how many of those 40,000 troops that we have in Germany have the primary job of shooting a weapon, driving a vehicle, or flying an aircraft that can kill a bad guy?
Well over 70%.
So over 70% of those 40,000 troops have a military occupational specialty or AFSCU that is about killing bad guys, not supporting frontline troops.
That's correct. They're the teeth of the military formation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Cotton. Senator Rosen, please.
Thank you, Chairman Reed, for holding this critically important hearing. General Wolters, I'm sure you understand more than most that the world is watching the United States as we support our NATO allies and help the Ukrainian people defend their country from Vladimir Putin's violent, unprovoked war on their democratic way of life. So with this in mind, earlier this month, I traveled to Poland and Germany as part of a bipartisan CODEL to reinforce to the world that Americans stand united in our support for Ukraine and the Ukrainian people. Throughout the trip, we did have the privilege of meeting U.S. forces supporting the Eucom mission. We received briefings from commanders on the situation on the ground in Ukraine, and we saw firsthand the security assistance and training NATO is providing. This trip underscored for me that we can and we must do more, taking additional actions to support Ukraine, helping them to defeat Putin's forces. And so I want to just turn to a little bit of talking about humanitarian aid, because in Poland we visited a refugee center where displaced Ukrainians were seeking shelter and refuge from Putin's brutality. And I saw women and children who fled, all women and children primarily, they fled their homes and the lives they'd built. We heard on the ground people in Ukraine are running out of food, water, medical supplies. So, General, what role is Eucom playing in supporting the U.S. military's humanitarian mission in the Ukraine? And how concerned are you that potential Russian gains might complicate your efforts to provide both the military and humanitarian assistance that they need?
Senator, we're very concerned, and Eucom is assisting with inventories, transactions back and forth with security assistance as well as humanitarian assistance to make sure that from a supply and demand standpoint, the right stuff goes in at the right time with the best possible force protection. And we will vary as necessary based off trends that exist in the environment to ensure that we can, as best we can, safely get the right goods to the right people at the right time, both from a security assistance standpoint and both from a humanitarian assistance standpoint. As a military organization, we're obviously working side by side with many of our government partners outside of the Department of Defense, as well as those that represent departments outside of the Department of Defense in the countries where these transactions are taking place, Poland and others.
Thank you. I want to move on to cyber threats because obviously you've alluded to it, General Van Ovost, and of course my colleagues as well. But I want to turn to Russian gray zone tactics. Russia has launched malicious cyber attacks to target Ukraine's infrastructure, its government networks, while utilizing disinformation to falsely paint Ukraine, of course, and I'm going to quote here, a Nazi regime. So, General Wolters, I have a three-part question for you on Russian hybrid warfare threats. First, have Russian cyber attacks compromised Ukrainian command and control? Second, do we have adequate strategies for countering Russia's information operations in eastern Ukraine? And third, given that NATO in 2014 declared that a cyber attack could lead to the invocation of Article 5, in your view, what should be the threshold for a Russian cyber attack that could lead to invoking Article 5?
Senator, the first question that has to do with Ukrainian C2, as I think most of us have seen in the public domain, the Ukrainian C2 is currently in place from a whole of government perspective on Ukraine's part all the way down to the military. So I would contend that Russia has been very challenged in that area, and Ukraine has been continued to be successful. I think the strategic implications are profound, and I believe that when we examine what has taken place up to this point and write books about it in the future, we'll look back and conclude and be comfortable with the fact that we have dramatically, from a U.S. perspective and NATO perspective, improved our tactics, techniques, and procedures as they contribute to a campaign in the area of offensive cyber and defensive cyber, and as well as the manipulation of how information comes out and how we can ensure that the truth still gets to the appropriate point. And I would just say that when it comes to what NATO does to declare an Article 5, as a military commander, what I'm responsible for is ensuring that we have all of the facts. And as you well know, Senator, we typically wind up in situations to where the next day after we quickly discover that we didn't have all the facts. And what I would owe the North Atlantic Council and NATO so that they can make the appropriate decision is to give as many of those facts as I can and provide my best military advice to the North Atlantic Council that would be responsible for making that decision, all 30 nations, about whether or not to enact Article 5. And in situations like this, when it comes to cyber, it's very difficult to get the facts, and you have to work hard to make sure that you get those, and that would be my responsibility at the time when that would occur.
Thank you. I see my time is up, but General Van Ost, I'll take this for the record about investing in the right cyber talent and modernizing IT capabilities in order to support all of this. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Rosen. Senator Kramer, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to both generals for being here and for your incredible service. General Wolters, I want to begin with you, go back to a conversation you had with Senator Wicker, specifically about the distinction of permanent assigned forces, as we obviously see this increase now in force. And as I understand, and maybe I'll drill down a little more, he was asking about permanent assigned forces. I think the bottom line was you said we should probably grow them. What I'm wondering is, over the last several years, as we've been drawing down Eucom, CENTCOM, or Eurocom and CENTCOM, to prepare more forces for other places, specifically the Pacific, and you've talked a little bit with Senator Hirono about the global issue. How do we reconcile the need for more forces everywhere? Do we just grow the force, or does this management of personnel become much more difficult? And by the way, I might also ask, and how does agile combat play into all of that? We in North Dakota are very cognizant of the B-52s and the role they've played, exercising, obviously. Maybe just talk a little bit about ACE and how that fits in as well.
Well, Senator, first, agile combat employment is very helpful, whether or not you're addressing permanent or rotational forces, to be able to take a unique capability and quickly insert it into a region, and then when no longer does it deliver the effect that helps enhance peace in that region, pull it out and get it back home where it needs to be to refit and be ready to respond globally. It's incredibly important. With respect to permanently assigned versus rotational, as we've seen what has unfolded in Ukraine with respect to Russia, It's allowed us the opportunity to take a look at a whole-of-government, multi-domain force and examine what shifts we could possibly make in the future. And I contend that we would probably be wise to examine what has unfolded in Ukraine and Russia and the periphery nations, and certainly from a NATO perspective and being a commander with respect to those NATO forces, those contributions that those allies and partners have committed impacts the appropriate effect that we can deliver, which goes all the way back to how smart we need to be with respect to making the right decision, giving global ramifications on permanent versus rotational. And the answer is still, I believe it depends. There's always goodness and badness in both cases, but I think we need to be smart about it and refit just a little bit and examine what's unfolded here to make a prudent decision going forward.
Well said, and you actually anticipated my next question and answered it, so thank you. Speaking of whole of government, General Van Ovost, you probably are as engaged in the whole of government approach as much, or more importantly, probably than anybody. There are two things that you've said that one in your opening statement, and I think it was your opening statement, where you said something to the effect that I look forward to working with the Navy to satisfy restrictions in current law. I think that was regarding the building of ships, right? And could you just elaborate a little bit on satisfy restrictions in current law? Should we be changing restrictions? Are you implying that, or are you just saying there's a lot of bureaucracy we have to work through and help me help you?
Thanks, Senator. The authorization is to purchase up to 9 used sea lift ships, 4 ships without a requirement for new build, but in order to purchase the 5th ship, the Navy has to submit a plan for 10 new ships being built, sea lift or OSV, general utility type ships, so we can continue to purchase used number 5 through number 9. So while we are given, in 2021, we have now purchased 2 ships, and we've been given the appropriation to purchase 5 more used ships, but we'll only right now be able to purchase 2 more until either the law is changed or the Navy submits a plan that's satisfactory to the committees.
Understand. So we need to work on that. You also referenced in a conversation, I don't remember which senator it was, it might have been Hirono, but you've referenced the term thickening partners a couple of times, I think. And what I'm wondering is, have you seen in recent months or recent years a changing, if you will, or a growing cooperation among our partners, with our partners in the Pacific specifically, to allow, for example, better access to ports and navigability that maybe wasn't there in the not-so-distant past? Are you seeing some improvement?
Yeah, Senator, I would say we are seeing improvement. The fine points of that improvement I would leave to Admiral Aquilino. But as we look to both our military and our commercial networks, as we are increasing our activities and exercises and interoperability with our allies and partners in the Pacific, we are seeing an increase.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Kramer. Senator Duckworth, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to both General Van Ovost and General Wolters for joining us today. As we near the milestone of 1 month into the invasion of Ukraine, we are hitting a critical moment in our pledge to support Ukraine and our NATO allies. What were once seen as ad hoc efforts to gather and distribute aid to the Ukrainian heroes combating Russian aggression will now become, or has become, a new normal. What was once an emergent situation will now test our commitment and our resilience as the fatigue of warfare sets in. This new reality will stress our own logistics networks, as we have to reinforce our delivery mechanisms into Ukraine in order to deter Russian interdiction. And it will challenge our industry partners to reopen or accelerate manufacturing lines to incorporate into the next aid package and to replenish our own stockpiles. So I'd like to start off by discussing the status of our inter-theater capabilities, which are critical to the work that we're doing in Europe and will be just as critical, if ever needed, for a contingency in the Pacific. During our last meeting, General Van Ovost, we discussed your plans to reduce the age of your strategic maritime assets by purchasing used replacement ships. This strategy is clearly proving successful, but with 34 of your 50 assets set to retire, I am concerned that we're not moving fast enough. General Van Ovost, what are the biggest obstacles you face in your strategy to buy used maritime assets, and what can Congress do to support your efforts during fiscal year 2023?
Thank you, Senator. And as we discussed, the aging ships are costing more to maintain, and even with that more money, we're not getting the readiness bang out of that buck. So we have had to make some prudent and cost-effective decisions to accelerate retirements of platforms, even without a backfill. I think most importantly, a stable plan of recapitalization with used ships to ensure that we get the most value out of it, and also to stabilize the shipyards, because these ships do go back and get modifications done as they come into the ready reserve fleet. So a nice stable platform for buy, about 4 a year, would be very helpful to close and be able to mitigate those gaps. But I also want to just reiterate that, you know, our organic fleet will never be able to do everything we need to do. So maintaining a healthy ready reserve fleet is good, but I also want to thank this committee for their work, not only on the continued stipend for the MSP, but also for the tanker security program that we just started to provide U.S. crewed, U.S. flagged ships for both fuel movement and for our regular maritime security program. These are force multipliers for us to ensure that we can continue to project and sustain the force into the future.
Thank you. On my second question, I want to turn back to logistics, but it's in Europe. I'd like to touch on issues of lessons learned and potential obstacles for the future. And I know we've already had a bit of a discussion on the EDI with my colleague from Oklahoma, Senator Inhofe. Given that we're nearly 4 weeks into this conflict in Ukraine and a month and a half into our increased presence and posture, we must take the opportunity to evaluate this strategy and look forward to what logistic challenges may be in our future. So General Wolters, I'd like to give you the opportunity to sort of discuss what lessons related to logistics should we be learning from U.S. operations in Europe, and what steps should we be taking during this fiscal year's budget cycle to plan for the enduring logistics challenge of a prolonged war in Ukraine, as well as the recovery that will come after that?
Senators, you will know from your history that this takes constant scrutiny, constant iterations, constant willingness to listen and process and prove. And we, during the start of this campaign in the vicinity of 27 February, stood up 2 logistics cells that actually iterate on all these processes. One is Eucom represented, the other one is internationally represented. And at the end of the day, you've got to get the right stuff in at the right time, and it has to be appropriately defended so that those individuals that are responsible for what we're putting in are protected. And when it goes into the actionable area, Ukraine, it's put to good use, and then you have to track it every second along the way. And we have that data, are maintaining that data, and we continue to iterate the process and prove all the way from acquiring it in CONUS to where it gets to the operator in Ukraine to make sure that we're doing the right thing from a logistics standpoint. And that's actually what those 2 cells are charged to do, as well as current day ops. And at the end of the day, it takes gigantic elbow grease every millisecond of the day to get right, and you have to wake up the next morning and tell yourself you're not probably doing it right and be prepared to iterate one more time. And that's what those 2 cells are currently in the process of doing at Stuttgart.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Duckworth. Senator Tuberville, please.
Thank you. Good morning. Thanks to both of you service. General Van Ovost, 2017, China put their first military base in Africa in Djibouti. Now it looks like they're possibly going to put one on the Atlantic side in Equatorial Guinea. Does that give you any concerns in Transcom?
Senator, it absolutely does. As they begin to elbow their way into these countries, they'll begin to affect their economic decisions and their diplomatic decisions, which could disrupt or delay our ability to access those same areas. So I am concerned about their building operations around the world as they're trying to protect their growing interests, not only in South America, but in Africa.
Thank you. General Wolters, you, off the question here a little bit, do we still have Afghan refugees in your purview?
Sir, we just closed out the last set that were at Camp Bechtel, and they're safe and secure in another country right now.
How many do you think you processed through your venue?
We actually processed 70,000 through the 4 sites in Europe.
Yeah, thank you. Awesome job. What do you think that, what does Finland and Sweden bring to the table in NATO?
Sir, the first thing they bring is forces that are ready, and they have a history of doing some wonderful things against folks that elect to violate their sovereignty. And their ready forces help lead from the front many of the other national forces that represent the NATO nations.
They have pretty strong military, considering their size?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Why do you think they shot hypersonics in Ukraine when they didn't have to?
I think it was to demonstrate the capability and attempt to put fear in the hearts of the enemy, and I don't think they were successful.
Yeah. What did it hit? Or was it 1 or 2?
There have been multiple launches.
Okay.
Most of them have been directed at military targets, still TBD based off the intelligence returns. But what I can say is most of those strikes have been designated at specific military targets.
One went one side of the country to the other. I mean, that takes a lot of guts to do that, knowing that I guess they knew it was going to work. You know, when I was over in Ukraine a few months ago, and the generals there were telling me about the new armor that they were putting on tanks. Has that been successful for Russia? I noticed a lot of tanks are torn up. Do you have any information on that? Have they held up, you know, the new armor to the javelins and the Stingers?
Sir, this is pretty anecdotal, but the feedback we're getting is if you have a lot of anti-armor, anti-tank munitions, you can slow down a tank. So even their new armor has some chinks in their armor, so to speak, with respect to multiple projectiles being launched at them.
Have we seen any new weapons other than hypersonic used in this war?
No, sir.
No. I'm anxious to see how the switchblades work. You know, I think that could be a huge benefit for us down the road and hopefully to Ukraine. Let's see, I had a couple more here. General Van Ost, Alabama is proud to have been selected as the permanent home of the U.S. Space Command in Huntsville. Recently, there have been comments made that question if the command would be able to easily move from their temporary home. That obviously would be part of your purview there. I just want to say that I have every confidence in your ability to guide Transcom through facilitating this move, following the IG's decision in the near future. If you can pull off the last-minute Afghanistan evacuation, this should be a piece of cake. But hopefully we can get that done. But I yield my time. And General, thank you for your service. You look forward to playing golf and fishing. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Tuberville. Senator Peters, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Wolters, let me first congratulate you and thank you for your 40 years of service. Your leadership and dedication to the men and women of our armed forces and our allies and partners has certainly helped shape the unprecedented strength and the unity of NATO against Putin's criminal aggression, so thank you. In your posture statement, you highlight this as perhaps the last time you expect to testify as Eucom commander, and the history has yet to be written about how the illegal invasion of Ukraine concludes. We will continue to count on you to remain steadfast in a difficult challenge until the time as you pass the mantle of leadership for Eucom commander and NATO Supreme Allied Commander Europe. General Wolters, in November of 2020, a trilateral ceasefire agreement was signed between Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Russia to conclude the conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh. And it seems as if Azerbaijan has taken advantage of the conflict in Ukraine by launching unprovoked assaults against Armenian villages. Given Russia's poor military performance in Ukraine, I'm concerned about their ability to keep the peace, especially as they may need to draw on the 2,000 Russian troops that are deployed there. So my question for you, sir, is what actions are we taking and what actions should we be taking to promote peace and stability in the Caucasus?
Senator, what we have to do first is ensure that through the defense attaché offices in Azerbaijan is get the facts with respect to the activities in Nagorno-Karabakh. And as you can well imagine right now, there's lots of finger pointing taking place back and forth. And the facts, as we know right now, is that Russia's involvement in imposing good order and discipline in that scenario was very little and very curious. So we'll continue to gather the facts and then take the next step forward with respect to Russia's play in this activity and with respect to Nagorno-Karabakh's activities of their defense force and the Azerbaijan force.
Right. General Wolters, nowhere in the world is the power of our alliance more evident than NATO. And the Michigan National Guard is proud to play a role in that alliance as Latvia's partner for nearly 30 years through the National Guard's State Partnership Program. In January, members of the Latvian National Armed Forces trained on air and ground force synchronization at Joint Terminal Attack Controllers in Camp Grayling, Michigan. My question for you, sir, is how valuable is the State Partnership Program to York security cooperation initiatives, and do you consider this an area of high return on investment in your AOR?
Sir, I would consider it an area of very high return on investment. The disposition of the force elements in Latvia today are very robust. There are lots of U.S. entities in Latvia as we speak, and they're able to shoot, move, and communicate side by side with the Latvian Armed Forces to a far more lethal degree than they have in the past as a result of the State Partnership Program.
General Officers, I understand that one brigade set of the U.S. Army's most modern Abrams tank has been deployed from the Army's pre-position stock in Germany to Poland to enhance NATO's deterrence posture. And given the use of heavy armored forces by Russia in Ukraine is continued, is rapid mobilization of the Abrams as the most powerful ground combat vehicle that we have important to you as a combat commander in Europe?
It is, Senator. It's a tremendous force multiplier when it comes to deterrence.
And is the recent decision by Poland to upgrade its tanks to the U.S. Army's Abrams to replace older Russian designs a significant development for NATO and allied nations in Europe?
Absolutely, yes, Senator.
General Van Ost, in your posture statement, you highlighted the significance of air refueling mission and stressed the importance of timely recapitalization. I spoke with Secretary Kendall just last week, and we each agree it is critical that Congress provides the Air Force with the right systems needed to deliver needed capabilities. And while the 2006 RAND analysis of alternatives may be somewhat outdated, it certainly outlined a few recapitalization options. So my question for you, ma'am, is from a capability standpoint, what do you think is the best recapitalization strategy?
Thanks, Senator. As I said, that air refueling is the lifeblood of our ability to project and employ a force. And if I could also mention that we cannot do it without the total force. So I appreciate the National Guard capacity. The best way to recapitalize is to have a stable plan that gets after the capabilities we're going to need in the future. The KC-46 is the future of air refueling because it can do multiple things, and it is connected to the battle, both with Link 16 and ability to be able to get communications off board and long range from that aircraft securely. So as we look to develop what capabilities we need in the future in a contested environment, we'll be looking at the lessons from the KC-46. I'll be working with the Air Force to describe those requirements into the future.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you very much, Senator Peters. I want to thank both the witnesses, General Wolters, not only for your testimony, but for your extraordinary service over many, many decades. You are in the most, at this moment, critical position, I think, in the military, and we're all fortunate that you're there. And thank you very much, and please communicate that to the men and women, particularly the 82nd Airborne Division. Yes, sir, all American. And General Van Ovost, thank you very much for your thoughtful approach to these problems and your very clear signals to us that we need to make some significant and difficult decisions with respect to reconfiguring our logistics, particularly in conflicted areas. With that, in the absence of any further of my colleagues here, I will adjourn the hearing.